Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start our video in which our OP was mistaken for a person whose time is worthless. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. Person I barely know asking for free legal advice. I, 29-year-old female, am a lawyer, and my field is real estate law and finance. My husband and I are looking to buy an apartment, and we've been looking into some properties in the last few months. About 2 months ago, a coworker from my husband's office told us she had a friend that was selling an apartment in our favorite neighborhood in the city, so we called and went to visit the place. We actually liked it a lot, but ultimately decided against the purchase since the asking price was way above our budget and the place needed a lot of work. We told the seller, she was nice about it, and the thing was over really quickly. Yesterday, I received a text from the seller, 30-ish female, saying, "Hey, sorry to bother you. I know that we don't know each other, but I found a buyer for the house and have a lot of questions regarding the legal aspects of the selling process. You mentioned in your visit that you're a real estate lawyer, so I was wondering if you could give me your email address so that I can send you a list of questions. Could you do me the favor of answering them, as I don't want to spend extra money on legal fees?" I didn't answer the text, and I don't know how I should approach the issue, but I'm actually pretty PO'd with the question. I would not hesitate to help without charge if it was a friend or even a minor acquaintance. I do this all the time. I earn a living by selling my time and expertise in the field and have no idea how she could think that I could waste maybe hours that I could otherwise be charging to help someone I have absolutely no connection with. I'm tempted to respond that if she wants to help, I can give her a free quote. On the other hand, I'm worried that she reacts badly and tells my husband's coworker and that this puts a strain on their professional relationship. In my view, just seems like an over-entitled B. Edit, sent a reply saying I'd be happy to help and provide a free quote for the services and that we could meet in my office so that she could explain her questions and I could provide an estimate for my fees. This was on Monday. No response so far. Haha. And our next story. Insult me in front of my staff, say goodbye to your family's political career. Cast, my father, Dad, politician, Jack, politician's brother-in-law, Bill, Bill's consultant, Dave, Dad's friend, Rob. Background, I live in an economically developing nation, used to be heavily dependent on agriculture produce for economic activity. The story. In the late 90s, my dad was offered a position of officer in charge of our home state for the agricultural department and had around 40 people working under him. His task was to take care of agriculture and its related activities and acted as advisor to the local farming community via local newspapers. That day, he was doing his work at his office when a commotion at the office entrance gets my dad's attention. He sees from the office window where 10 expensive cars are parked and a group of thugs holding the collar security personnel. Suddenly, Bill and his men walk into my dad's office, pushing my dad's staff away. Bill introduces himself and mentions that he's the brother-in-law of Jack the senator from our region and calls himself one of the most powerful people in the region. Bill tells my dad that he was there to discuss availing the grant the government provides for a project that he was planning. My dad, at times, is submissive to people in position of power, as he's seen consequences firsthand as some of his friends lost jobs or lives standing against powerful people. So Dad asked for the details of the project Bill was planning and asked him to send over the project proposal and an official request for the grant to him for reviewing and inform Bill that the grant cannot be processed until the project is completed. Bill gets angry that the proposal for the project is enough to qualify for a grant and should be paid upfront for the project construction. A few weeks go by, my dad receives a huge set of documents via the Postal Service, and you might have guessed it. Those documents were related to Bill's project. Going through those documents, my dad identifies that they came from Dave, a consultant who was doing the work on behalf of Bill, and the documents further reveal that warehouse proposed in the region was big enough to hold enough food grains to feed a population equivalent for 2 states for an entire year. The proposed project would cost them $1.5 billion, and once completed would cost the government $300 million in the grant. He quickly calls his boss, asking him what he was supposed to do. His boss quickly looks at the rules and tells my dad that since there was no upper limit on the size of the warehouse or project cost, The only thing they could do was to review and process the application, and if everything checks out, they might end up with $300 million in grant money. Some time goes by, Dave comes to my dad's office in an expensive luxury SUV. Dave now angrily informs my dad that he represents Bill and Jack and the warehouse needs to be inspected today or lose his job. Dad was not buying it and told him again 2 days or forget it. Dave leaves the office warning my dad that he'll face consequences. Dad calls his boss informing him what had happened, and the boss tells my dad to take priority and inspect the warehouse at the earliest. 2 days later, Dave gives my dad a tour of the entire warehouse, explaining to him how state-of-the-art it was for the time. My dad takes note of every detail of the warehouse and informs Dave that the grant can't be approved due to the fact that the warehouse was not constructed with storing agricultural produce in mind, and no one with a sound mind would overlook the fact to approve the grant. Dave starts yelling and excusing my father that he was looking for a bribe by withholding their grant, and my dad would approve the grant once he gets paid off. Bill and Jack are being targeted for making money off them. None of that was true about my dad. He was an honest man his entire life. My dad leaves the warehouse unsure of what he should do to get out of the situation. My dad, who was super confused about why Bill had built an industrial warehouse in the middle of nowhere, and only the major activity in the region was farming. So he decides to call up Rob and ask him a few questions about how Rob's government agency, Construction and Building Permits, has provided Rob, takes a couple of days to identify some horrific realities. First, the plans of the warehouse showcase and request permit to be an industrial complex for storing manufacturing goods. Bill bribed his way through Rob's agency and got environmental clearance and other permits without conforming to standards. This was news to my dad and Rob. They were shocked to know how Bill and Dave were able to inflate the cost of the warehouse, and they had plans to make the region a new industrial zone. My dad calls his boss and informs that Bill's project seems fishy and he would reject the grant and forward him the documents once done. His boss tries to reason with him that it could be a career-ending move for both of them. Jack was trying to put pressure from the leader of the agency to have the grant approved. Rob decides to dig around and see if he can get any more information and found the contract paper that was sent to the Food Procurement and Storing Agency, which raised several red flags. First, the contract stated an inflated rent for storing food grains, then rent would be reviewed on a yearly basis based on market rate, and then the contract would make the agency pay for the next 15 years, irrespective of whether the agency stores food or not. Rob calls my dad with this information. Now my dad is furious to know how Bill and Jack are planning to rob the government, decides to reject the grant for their project. A few days later, Bill turns up at my dad's office along with Dave in the same bashing manner he previously did. Dad tells him to wait for 1 month and expect those papers signed after that. Thugs then go on to ransack the entire office before leaving and also threaten the staff to make sure his boss signs those damn papers approving the grant. My dad calls Rob and informs him what had happened and asks him to fax all the documents collected so far, Bill's project, and he would be asking for those documents officially. My dad then calls up his boss to inform him that he'd be going on a 10-day vacation. By the end of the day, my dad leaves the office with all documents related to Bill's project and fax documents from Rob and head home. For the next 10 days, my dad sits at home going through every document, evidence he gathered with the help of Rob, and drafts his grant rejection letter with a lot of details, as he didn't want to leave a chance that anyone who could replace him or higher up above him rejecting his comments on the project and approve the grant. After the vacation, goes back to the office. The same day, my dad asks his assistant to mail the documents to his boss as a confidential report. His assistant takes the documents and heads to the nearest postal office. At the same time, Bill's men come to my dad's office to check with him if he had signed the documents or not, and he'd be in serious trouble if it's not done. My dad lies to them that he's approved the grant and his assistant has just gone to mail those documents to his boss for processing, and it would take up to 3 months for the grants to arrive. My dad also tells them to inform Bill that everything has been taken care of and there's nothing to worry about anymore, so that my dad won't be bothered by Bill or his men any further. A week later, my dad's boss furiously calls and asks my dad about the grant rejection letter he sent him and how crazy my dad was, which could end up having them both killed. My dad assures his boss that he's taken care of everything, including Bill and Jack, and nothing to worry about, and all he has to do was hold on to those documents for a month or so. A month later, a local newspaper breaks a story of how Jack was corrupt to the hilt and Bill was a partner in his crimes. The same morning, Bill's arrested from his mansion, half naked and totally drunk. Bill was charged with corruption, bribery, racketeering, money laundering, and more awful things. Bill's men were also arrested and were sentenced to life along with Bill. Jack was arrested for corruption, bribery, intimidation, and abuse of power. Jack made bail but never won the election again, eventually retiring from politics. A decade later, Bill testified against Jack for the crimes they both committed, and Jack was sentenced to 15 years in jail. Dave was also charged with bribery, forgery, and money laundering. No one ever knew how that could happen to Bill and Jake, except Rob and my dad. I still see the abandoned warehouse whenever I travel to my hometown from the city where I work. If there were only more honest men in the world like your father, I'm certain we wouldn't get into 90% of the messes we've been in. You've had a magnificent example. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.